And this is the final session, which is a panel on responsible geopolitics of quantum technologies. Sadly, Peter needs to leave in 30 minutes because, you know, there are trains and planes that we have to catch. So without a break, we should start. And I'm leaving the floor to Astrid, who is our moderator for this panel. I would like to thank her and then just get out of her.
So hi, I am Astrid from University of Vienna.
Nice to meet you.
And I'm happy to moderate this panel. And because Peter will go so soon, my first question, even though I have a lot of questions to everybody and they're all pressing, would be to Peter. And that would be, what is, when looking at this whole scenery, quantum rays, system approach, and so on, what do you think is the most pressing issue when looking at geopolitics regarding quantum technology?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm still impressed by the previous talk, but so I'll make a link there. So if you look at what's happening with quantum technology now, the way in which Brussels and Washington, maybe also China is thinking about it, you seem to have a siloing effect. So the blocks wants to develop the technology themselves. That gives opportunity. So we Europeans, for us, it puts on the table, we want to have a quantum computer ourselves too. So we're not waiting for Silicon Valley, the old Silicon Valley. So that's what's going to happen. Also, supply chain independence, that's which to be realized. What I think is that it's just an engineering requirement. Make a quantum computer, this time not globally, but per block. And I think that can be solved. So that's not a big consequence. It's a consequence, but not a big consequence. The bigger consequence I see in the governance regulation. So they're listening to Matthias and talks about a world governance of quantum, and then as an example gave the EU regulation of AI. That there's the catch. So it will not. If you look at the future constellation, there will not be so easily a world governance. We have to prepare that is done more locally, or locally per continent. So that's where we have to prepare for, that we are going to do ethical analysis, RI, governance, regulation, not on a global level, but at another level, more local level. That's the consequences. I don't know yet how to do that with RI. It seems not to have consequences, but yeah, the secrecy that we cannot reveal anything, what's happening that might have an impact on transparency needed for RI. Those are the two the biggest consequences that we have to rethink our model of governance.
So I would like to ask Matthias, do you have other pressing issues for this problem?
Yes, I'd like to push back a little by leveraging what we know works in other fields, namely the so-called Brussels effect. We know, for instance, from data protection, we know from privacy rights, we know from platform rules that there is a certain normative pull of good rules and good practices. California's consumer privacy bill is to a large degree a copy of the GDPR with some privacy elements added and a bit of innovation language in it. So my argument would not so much be we need European rules to have good global processes of quantum governance, but rather I think the only geographical constellation that is currently able to come up with solid and legitimate rules regarding any technological constellation in the European Union. The US is blocking itself. China is not democratic. Russia has said goodbye to the consensus of values. So there's no international setting where we could discuss rules where Europe doesn't play a fundamental role. That's why this is a duty that has substantial, that should weigh substantially on the shoulders of European-based researchers, namely whether they can contribute to the global discourse meaningfully. I mean, institutions like the World Economic Forum would be a counter example, but here too, I would submit that that European researchers play a substantial role. Correct me if I'm wrong in the process. So I think that there's a certain genius loci right now situated in and around the atomium.
Yeah.
Mira, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, two elements. So on the idea of kind of, I want to push back a little bit on the idea of too easily taking what we have on AI ethics as best practices and adopting that for quantum. I think we don't, as we know, also if we look at the different roadmaps, we don't have a time pressure. So I would like us as a community to take the time to reflect, are these AI ethics principles, are they actually good practices? Or what of those are good practices and what of those can we adopt? And that goes into the second point more on what are the pressing issues for governance as well, is the inclusiveness of these processes. And I think that goes to the point sort of, Pieter, you were making, but also that there is currently, maybe there is the kind of focus, or it's coming out of Europe, but that's in itself, I think, is very problematic. So I think the processes, at least the ones I'm seeing, they're very much exclusive. They are not including perspectives that we should be including. And I think the AI ethics principles processes, how they've come about, they were very exclusive as well. And so I think that's something where I would urge us kind of to, when thinking about governance, to take the opportunity that we haven't, that we're still in the anticipatory phase, that we don't have to regulate because something bad has happened, that we use that time to make the processes now more inclusive. And I'm not sure whether in the technology development we can necessarily go against the siloing. I think that train is kind of, that is gone, but at least in the governing, we can attempt to do so.
May I just
Yeah, you can answer directly.
So I agree. A number of the AI ethics declarations are non-representative and not even well drafted. But the one, where I did that implementation study on, the AI ethics declaration by UNESCO, that is a very good example of as bottom-up process as any process where states are involved can be. They did that for 3 years. 192 states, all UNESCO member states, finally accepted that recommendation. That's a feat unto itself. You had China on board, you had Russia on board, I mean, it was before Ukraine, but still, you had the US on board, you had Europe on board. So all of those states agreed, and you had strong stakeholder involvement by civil society. That's why I would argue that at least those ethical standards, those AI standards, deserve at least a critical evaluation to see whether we can harness them. Of course, the challenges of quantum technology are different in substantial ways. There's this big elephant in the room of having to create the machinery, right? Which is different in AI, because it's much easier to have some sort of AI application where ethics might matter. So there's this strong architectural dimension, that's true. But I still would argue that those guidelines, those recommendations, are at least one yardstick one can keep in mind, especially because they're so well made and look also towards the gender dimension, economical, ecological dimensions.
Do you want to add
Yeah,
something?
yeah, sure,
Okay.
yeah. So I hear Matthias speak about an ideal case. I hear Mira to talk about hope. And that's fine, but let's now design a realistic trajectory of governance. Then I would immediately follow up on what Matthias said was reality, namely that Europe will design rules, and that these rules will be slowly, hopefully, adopted by the rest of the world, because the other parties don't effectively do it for themselves. We do it. So we become regulation valley. Great. Now, if we do that, if that is the realistic approach, and we can arrive at that global governance through Europe. The next question is, how do you do that in a well manner? How can Europe design rules for quantum such that they are good in the end? First thing which comes to me, to mind is that, okay, involve Africa. Don't see it just purely as a power play game, but think about other rules. So it's not about getting the money and the economic prosperity here. If we, Europe, if Brussels will do it, well, how would we like them to do it?
So I would go into the same direction, asking you back, what would be the responsible action looking at the regions left behind? What could be a responsible action?
Yes, so there I hit on a snack, so to say. Ideally, you would then say, okay, let's have an open, transparent, RI-style event, but now on the level of countries. So let's discuss with the Africans and other countries, Latin America, what they would like. But then we have to put on the table what we actually are making. And part of the geopolitical game is, to some extent, not tell that to the others. So I would say indeed participatory consultation, but there is a problem.
Mira, you working at IBM and also being integrated so much into the World Economic Forum, do you have an idea on what could that be? And instead of just putting it on the table, what we do? So is there a responsible way to act with the regions that are left behind?
Yeah, so I think I was just thinking on the how can we on Pieter's comment on how can we do that whilst not disclosing what we're actually doing. So I think one opportunity to a certain extent, but you will always be able to criticize, it's limited. IBM is only disclosing what they want to be disclosing. But one opportunity is, of course, and that's there's a business strategy behind it. We don't have to be naive about it, to have more users around the world. And so that motivates, giving access to educational tools, giving access to hardware infrastructure, and also enabling professors, enabling universities around the globe to use these technologies. Of course, there's a business interest that motivates the strategy, but you could argue that at least the part of where these countries are then getting access, and maybe even getting access for free, at least, that's some access, whether or not the motivation, you might want to differentiate that from the motivation. And one actually very concrete, to be very pragmatic or realistic. So there's the GESTA, the Geneva Science Diplomacy, I think I see nodding, so I don't know exactly the acronym, but they're doing the Open Quantum Institute, and their initiative is to do precisely that, to work with the diplomatic community, to have the diplomatic community essentially sign up to that, and then have the access and have access to quantum computers, and then allow developing nations or nations who don't have access through themselves, through GESTA, get access to it, also get access to educational material. I think that's actually a much better way than sort of IBM doing it, because it's somewhat more neutral. So I think that, but you will always be able to criticize to say, well, they're only, you know, giving what they want to be giving, but at least that's one step. And the second step I'm seeing is that also through the team I'm in, so the Responsible Inclusive Tech team, we're now organizing a workshop in Brazil, so kind of on responsible quantum computing, responsible technologies. Of course, there's power dynamics because it's organized, you know, through us, but also with the local academic partners, with local politicians. So I think the second step is actually going to the regions and kind of avoiding this pitfall of speaking about the regions and then maybe inviting one or two representatives. But I think the discussions have to take place sort of in the regions. And I would say that Europe or European institutions could make a wider effort to going there and to speaking there, because so maybe to just quickly, I worked in Cambodia for the GIZ, and once you're there you notice that the concerns we think that are important, so currently we think that quantum computing is very important and that certain nations should be, you know, thinking more about how to get quantum ready, but then once you're there you notice that this is very much not the priority, and that they have, you know, other very important things to think about. And so I think it's important to go there and to learn, you know, who could be the multipliers who could start thinking about responsible quantum or to use quantum and to get involved and not be left behind.
Matthias, do you have something to add?
I have just one question. Is there a follow-up planned by the World Economic Forum, or are you involved in implementation?
Yeah. I would love actually feedback on those, because I'm very myself wondering. I haven't formed an opinion on what I think about it. So the follow-up plan is to develop a blueprint for national quantum strategies. So I think they have for AI, they have sort of developed a blueprint for AI national strategies, and so they want to do the same for quantum. And coming back to the siloing question, I see a risk there and too much emphasis on the national and sort of giving blueprints for nations to develop quantum computing strategies. However, you know, if there can be recommendations in such a national blueprint to cooperate, then maybe that risk can be worked against. I'm not sure, but that's the next step.
Well, Mira, if I may ask? Is your process connected to the UN process, the Summit on the Future for 2024 and the Global Digital Compact?
So the VEST process, as far as I'm aware, is not connected to that, no. But I think the Jester process is.
Yeah, but wouldn't it make a lot of sense to connect those processes? Because right now, the German government is holding consultations on the Global Digital Compact with stakeholders in the African Union, the OAS, the ASEAN, with a view to improving, you know, the Global Digital Compact. That's the Secretary General's, let's say, the program of action that he wants to then have feed into the 2024 Summit on the Future. And this will be heavily influenced by tech considerations. And to me, it feels like this would be a very important part of the whole UN strategy on the Summit on the Future, to include a commitment to quantum technology for the common good in that process.
Yeah. I think that that's very interesting to come to the realities of these. Where you see that the Jester and the WEF, they're across the lake in Geneva, and the Jester wasn't even invited to participate in the governance principles that I spoke about earlier. So there's I 100% agree with your suggestion, but there's the realities also of the power dynamics and the place with these individual institutions, and I'm luckily not representing either of them. But that are also a challenge.
So thank you so much. So getting back at the silo effect that Pieter talked earlier, I hear a lot about quantum race and digital sovereignty. So do you think there's political concepts that enhance the silo effect, or are there political concepts that will answer this problem?
enhance the silo effect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Matthias?
If you continue to focus on digital sovereignty, as a lot of states are doing, this is obviously going to be counterproductive. Unfortunately, the European Union itself tries to leverage the concept of digital sovereignty, and they haven't yet understood that it has positive effects, namely emancipating European production capabilities, and that's a good thing. But the problem is that a lot of states are using sovereignty in the wrong way, namely sovereignty as a concept that stops cooperation and not sovereignty as responsibility, as Kofi Annan already put it. Sovereignty is important, but it's sovereignty as responsibility, because states are sovereign. They are in a special position to take certain decisions that might be unpopular, that might be individually unpopular, but in the long term they have to exercise that sovereignty vis-a-vis strong private parties that might endanger the rights of their citizens, and also in the interest of the international community. So there's a danger of having a reductionist reading of sovereignty. You need to counter that by enriching it by a notion and a commitment to international solidarity.
No, but I would disagree here. So you could even argue for the silo effect out of responsibility for the global situation. We learned from COVID, we learned from Trump that we are entangled, economically speaking, in a way which we don't like, and which that's also one of the reasons for what the consequence we have right now with the Ukraine war is due to the thinking, actually, from my Prime Minister Lewis, that okay, we're going to help the Russians by tying them into our economic system. So we buy all their gas and then they will never go to war. Well, that flipped around. So we are now all of a sudden politically not happy with all these ties, over global ties, and we are politically also not happy, sorry Mira, about the big tech companies. And so we have to feel that should be different. You could see the silo effect as a response, and then immediately also the answer what political factors help enforcing this silo effect. Well, because we want to, in a sense, get independent of big tech, independent of a future Trump and China.
So Mira, because you are working in a big tech company, I would like to ask you also about the silo effect, but with a special question to scientific collaboration under this problem of having sovereign or sovereignty issues now that have not been shown up before. So
yeah, so I think it should be really be emphasized. My identity is less this big tech corporation, mostly this small lab at IBM Research in Zurich, and that very much you will have noticed that in the ways that I commented. And so as that, the question of sovereignty is actually, every time I was listening to all the great things that are happening as part of the flagship and so on. We were based in Switzerland. We're out of the Swiss. I couldn't even vote, but the Swiss decided to leave the contracts with the EU, and hence we can't be part of the flagship. And that is. I mean, that is very challenging in doing scientific work. Also in doing the scientific work I'm doing, I think it might be less challenging, so because it goes through other institutions. Luckily, we are a very recognized research institution. So I could just say, if I wasn't doing this role, this research at IBM Research, that is recognized as a research institution, I can apply for Swiss funding. I can be part of the European Academic Network. But if I wasn't doing that, I think I'd felt very isolated and not for the better. So here I think, and I don't want to speak too much for my colleagues, but you can really notice that we also have an identity, or to have an identity as IBM Research Europe. So we're having collaborations, Marie Curie students, collaborations across Europe, that we were all very proud of and that we were all very entangled on. You can imagine that the people working in the lab are not even 50% are even Swiss, so they're from across Europe, that they wanted to uphold those, and also they very much think of a European strategy for quantum computing. And so I think from our perspective, it's almost more a mourning of this more siloing.
Yeah. Just one message to the audience online. You can also write your comments or questions into the chat, and I can see it and ask your questions. So please write down when you have something pressing. Sorry.
Just like an agricultural comment. I mean, we know what happens in silos, right? Agriculturally, right? And the substantial dangers those silos pose, right? At least in Austria, people die every year in agricultural silos because they get stuck in there or they fall into it and then they breathe in, and that's over, right? So without playing too much on the metaphor, but let's be careful not to be stuck in those silos.
Because of wide open deserts and enormous oceans, that's what it was said.
Well, I mean, at least us in the Nordics, we have at least a view to the dangers, no? No, but I like this notion of entanglement. I mean, isn't it rather beautiful when the field that you want to regulate sort of visually can be traced back to the way that you are connected in attempting to regulate it. We're all entangled. We're all entangled. The political fields which we are looking at here have such strong ties. So the problem rather is we need to define a lodestar, right? We need to define a point at which to which we can orient our normative efforts, right? And one small suggestion: we can do worse than say that we use these Sustainable Development Goals as our normative goal to reach. That's something all states of the world have agreed on, and the United Nations has been working on implementing them for a long time. So they're basically above reproach. You can always quibble with details, but the Sustainable Development Goals and any action further them could, I would argue, be a good first goal to look at normatively when designing.
So getting back to this, Matthias, speaking about the quantum race, our way of speaking about quantum technology really leads to competition. And is that helpful, or do we need to find another language?
So that kind of quantum race. I thought the one which I tried to get out of our rector, a quantum race. Yeah, that didn't work. No, well, I mean, the competition isn't always bad. I mean, competition can be enriching. The problem is it shouldn't be competition for competition's sake, right? From what I understand, there are a number of good European consortia that have come together to work together on quantum world machinery in the broad sense. I know, from speaking to my colleagues at the two of the three startups that are within our lab, they couldn't do they couldn't work without connecting with regard to certain aspects with their fellow colleagues. The one startup, AQT, Parity QC, they're building this quantum architecture, right? I understand that it can also be used sort of as a non-localized basis for quantum computing. So they could theoretically rent out, if I understand it correctly, access to their architecture, which would allow for a non-geographically contingent use of quantum power, computing power. So I think that competition is good within the limits of not undercutting the values that should inform any competitive process.
If I can just interject quickly.
Yes.
I must disclaim I haven't read it, but I recently found a paper on the military rhetoric of quantum technology by Emma McKay. And I think maybe you were alluding to that, but I think that is something that is worrying me, as that the rhetoric that is being used. I mean, of course, it's no, everyone knows that in the US, the Department of Defense started funding quantum technologies or quantum computing research. But if we did a narrative analysis of the way we spoke about, we're speaking about quantum computing, and the war-loaded analysis or terms we're using, aside from the fact whether or not competition is good for innovation, I wonder. So I really like your question. I wonder, do we do us any good keeping with these very war-related terms and narratives?
But we do that with AI too, you know. There are studies on, you know, AI narratives that basically come to the same conclusion. You know, what's interesting, my institute in Berlin has done a study on AI imaginaries, which is a bit more exciting to think about what are not only the narratives we tell ourselves, but also the visions we dream of when we talk about the use of AI. And I think probably we should again leverage that. And we don't have to reinvent everything. So we could think about having like a session at some place on quantum imaginaries. So what is it that we believe we can achieve? Because anything that can be thought of can be realized at some point. So quantum imagination perhaps should be more important than before.
So Pieter, going back to that, everybody comes here from kind of like a philosophical line of thought with Matthias. I combine now Kant because of the World Forum. But maybe it's not Kant, it's Wittgenstein, and it's our language.
Yeah, I must say that I'm increasingly become less philosophical myself. So I would like to duck the question. I'm becoming more an engineer in a sense. So the ethical questions or the political questions, I don't approach them anymore from a philosophical point of view, with ideals or with visions or imaginaries. But I'm trying to understand what happens if we use this technologies and we implement them in the existing systems. Engineering, that's an engineering question. Engineering systems question. What will happen? What will happen if you have one quantum computer of plus a million qubits? Well, you create scarcity because there's just one, and it will be you can access it through the cloud. Well, then you can, if you see that situation, that engineering situation, then you have a good view on what the ethical societal impact will be. Well, if that happens, I would argue it's not Jesta who will get control of that computer. It will not be in Geneva. Where would it be? So it's much more a practical question. And then from that, taking the governance perspective, and we can anticipate that. So that's I fully agree with you that in governance we can anticipate the moral issues or the issues later. Right. But it's to some extent I find what you say really idealistic. It's not taking into account the engineering context or political context.
So just asking you, do you like see transformative capabilities that could like ease geopolitics in quantum technology?
Yeah, if we would be really transparent, so if we would address that issue of the other countries, and if we would share our technology or what it can do with other countries, and indeed for quantum computing, it's difficult. But I'm also thinking about sensing. Should we share our quantum sensing technologies? If you can do that, in addition to that, you have a kind of local sovereignty of kind of regional sovereignty. I think that's the way to go.
So that would be like broaden up to discuss other technologies and not only the quantum computer, because that's of course
I was thinking about also quantum internet and quantum sense. Quantum computing is one case. The rest is.
Mira, do you see a possibility where quantum could ease geopolitical tensions? Is there something we could like use for us and make our lives easier in this sense?
Well, I think that's too much of the idealist philosophy in me to wanting to say yes. Where I see it is that, you know, in the supply chain of building a quantum computer, and the way of building a computer has to be collaborative. It can't, I mean, yes, it's certain silos, it's the US with Europe, but it, you know, it can't be done fully in silo. Also the raw materials, if you go into not superconducting, but spin qubits, you will need to collaborate to get the raw materials for that. So you could argue that in order, if we as a global community wanted to achieve building a quantum computer, building a working quantum computer, we need to collaborate, and that forces us to collaborate. But I wouldn't go as far as saying it eases geopolitical tensions. And I unfortunately rather see where it reinforces geopolitical tensions also with, you know, decisions on, as a US company, we are restricted by US export controls. So there's a very clear red list of companies we can be working with and companies who can have access to the computers. That's apart from any, you know, ideal normative decisions. But I don't, depending on, say, where politics in the US goes, that export control list might grow. And so I don't think that necessarily goes into easing tensions.
Is there a question in the room, actually? Then just raise your hand and be ready. So I saw that there's also a discussion going on in the internet, and it's more about no, there comes another one in. Okay, that was that quantum computing is a dual use technology, and how we could regulate this aspect. So
yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that, because to take the military use of tech is like the use of consumer tech within the porn industry. You know, so the military is like the porn and gaming industries. They're the avant-garde, where a lot of money gets into without any bigger questions being asked. You know? That's why a lot of the technological advances with regard to, for instance, platforms come from pornography and gaming industries, like, you know, things as easy as continuous video looping, or non-click continuous video looping, which has entered mainstream use too. And the same goes with more, let's say, infrastructural technology. That's where the military application is often the first one to be thought of. The internet has also been heavily financed at its very early beginning through DARPA. So I wouldn't, you know, yeah, it's good to think about that. Anything can have military applications, but I wouldn't, you know, be too worried about that. And also regarding the narratives, I sometimes feel that we are over analyzing the narratives, because without sounding at all dismissive of humanities' approaches to tech discourse, sometimes I get the impression that we focus a bit too much on narratives because they're easy to dissect. And it's always easy to say, oh, those narratives are constructing certain things. Yes, that's true. That's what narratives are about. But what is it actually that we can take from it then, you know? It's easy to write a paper deconstructing narratives, but what's the next step, right? narratives, well, we don't always have to deconstruct them. They make sense, you know. There's a beautiful paper called The Nomos and the Narrative, which ties together how laws are being narrativized, you know. We all want the world to make sense. We develop orders, and we then justify those orders, and then develop narratives in order to tell ourselves how those justifications make sense. And that's how technology evolves, right? And we need narratives. We need narratives to make sense how to integrate the QT into our societies. So let's stick with them for a while, okay? And let's not be too much afraid of military dimensions of that. Keep them in mind, but not be too afraid. Nomos and narrative is better than chaos and confusion anyway.
That's true. So in your talk, you spoke about norms as telos. Is that?
Well, no, I said that. Well, I mean, did I say norms as telos? I mean, it sounds like me. But what I meant was telos is just, you know, the Greek word for goal, right? We, you know, in law we say there are different ways to interpret norms, and one of them is the teleological interpretation. The one looking at the goal of the norm. What does the norm want to reach? And we interpret it in a way so that the goal can be reached. My argument was that we should focus on good societal values that could be informed by the SDGs, for instance, and use them as a lodestar to guide our future normative work based on the principles that Mira has been involved with, which the more I read about them, the nicer they sound to me.
I think to conclude and now run to my training, this is a topic where we can play a decisive role. So maybe the researchers themselves, developers, the companies will be divided over these silos. We are not. From law to philosophy to humanities, we can reach over, and we should. Just like the European community started, it was effort to be transparent over different countries. Maybe in a few times we can become that.
Okay, so let's have as our first goal of QT rule, stopping the Germans.
No,
which was one of the goals of the European community.
No, it was sharing industry across the.
Making sure Germans don't build up coal and steel, right? And being transparent about coal and steel production.
This is a fully. No, it was meant to institutionalize spying.
Yes. In a way,
yeah. And stopping the Germans, it's time to get my.
That's when the Dutch people go, you know.
I'm awesome. I can say that.
So, looking at the system rivalry and geopolitics, you more and more find something that I would call technopolitik, and that is the deployment of technological goods for political reasons. That's a lot of countries do. Do we destroy our own free markets by doing so, Mira? Yes. Yeah, finally we can see Matthias.
I think I struggle with that question because I struggle with the concept of free market. I mean, so, you know, there's a number of factors that are possibly challenging free markets. I'm not really sure I'm really an advocate of that concept of free market, where that question might be coming from. So what I am seeing is that certainly that there is a lot of decision making related to, on the one hand, from the countries who are political decision making, and also political strategy from the countries on the one hand who are developing quantum computers, and then on the other hand who are also then buying quantum computers. I mean, I think we could, to kind of, as we're in Germany, look at the decision that was taken by, why did Angela Merkel decide to buy the system from IBM, put it in the south of Germany? What was the political strategy there? rather than wait until there would be a German system developed, and then also the entire politics around which institution would she assign to getting that that system. You know, why did Fraunhofer get it? What's the implications of that? And then the implications of sort of restrictions then on them being able to share that access across Europe or only within Germany and so on. So I think that if you look into the decisions that are taken there, they're very much techno-political decisions. I would shy away from the are they destroying the free markets, because yeah, I'm too ambivalent about the concept, but I would just agree with the assumption of that they're very much intertwined.
Go ahead. Question from the audience.
Can people hear me in Zoom? Yeah, I'll take those yes. It's just a comment again on the points regarding the UN and UNESCO. We have talked about certain, let's say, shortcomings that we have had with processes that are ongoing. For example, the VEF process. We have had a very selected group of individuals that have gotten together to compile this report, which has merit, but at the same time, I think defining words such as fairness. What is fairness in the report? Because it is a word that is mentioned a couple of times, and I think it's a word that can mean a lot of different things for different people. So I'll just propose that we could take this to UN, we could take this to UNESCO, have the classic, very long diplomatic discussions that have come to characterize the international system and make the best of all of the time that we have right now to discuss this at length and to make it not only a discussion for the sake of the outcome, but to make the process in itself something valuable for educational purposes, as with gestures and so on. Basically learning by doing. So I'll just I just wanted to put that comment forward and just say that really I don't think we have that much of a problem. We already have a solution. We already have a huge infrastructure that has been created throughout decades, and we can use it. It doesn't have to be any binding resolution or anything of the sort. And then the question is, I wanted to know if Mira could tell us something about her perspective from a company that should like to communicate to us in general, because this is a little bit of a rare opportunity in certain academics circles to just talk with industry. So I wanted to know if you have anything that we could take away from this discussion about, let's say, the individual perspectives within IBM. What would it be? So that we can have better assumptions while we're thinking about IBM and how things work inside, and just generally more other tech companies.
Did you hear that?
Can you just repeat the last question? I heard a comment and then there was other things in the connection. So whether I can share more on the individual perspective. Yeah, can you just repeat it, please?
So it was just asking if you could tell us something about your perspective from IBM that perhaps you think that is misunderstood in academia and that we could take away and just make it part of our assumptions to be a little bit more accurate and to understand a little bit better how, let's say, the private sector and more specifically teams like yours are engaging with this.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, hi.
Hi. Thank you. Yeah. So first of all, thanks for your comment as well. I think I largely agree with the comment. I very much agree with the let's take the time that we have and to learn from the process. To be honest, also you notice that in my comments to the WEF process, that I was to a certain extent surprised by the process, that the process hadn't learned more from other exercises. So I found it a almost old school process. Please don't quote me on that one. So yeah, I think we should take the time to improve that. On where it's misunderstood, I think it's difficult to say, because in this, responsible quantum and so on, it's an emerging field. There's not much literature where I can say, oh, this is really misrepresenting the reality at a company. But there are a couple of things. I think the statement I made earlier on ultimately everyone who works on quantum computing and I think that's not an overstatement, but people who devote their careers to quantum computing now, it's a bet. I mean, yes, it can be a very, very successful bet, and the teams who are working on education and trying to get people in there, they're also, that's not an overstatement, but it can also be, a bet that goes the wrong way. It can also be involving your entire career into something that's not really going to be successful. So the people who do it, they are motivated by the positive and the good it can bring to humanity, to use that slogan. So I think if that can be kind of taken into account, that the ones who are really developing it, that's some of the core motivation, in addition to the core motivation actually being physics. They want to see, can we build that system? So if I could generalize, these would be the two core motivations. Can we do it, but also can we do it to use it to solve problems? So something that sounds like a marketing slogan, but the slogan bringing quantum computing to the world for and finding useful applications, that's a kind of actual motivation. So there's a truth in there. And the second one is also that there's different trends in the companies with different realities. So of course, I was saying earlier, of course, the strategies are motivated by business decisions. There is a motivation by IBM to bring that out. I mentioned that yesterday, bring the quantum computer out as a product. We need that in order to be successful as a company. That is very, very clear. But that with that, there's also decisions that are made. There's decisions as to, do we put the quantum computers on the cloud or do we not? That a lot of the IBM's competitors are not putting the quantum computers on the cloud. So I think in processes of regulation and processes of thinking about how ought we continue working with these technologies, we can also emphasize kind of good practices and enable tech corporations to be successful when they're taking these decisions that are going towards the good, rather than taking decisions that are more going towards their individual advantages.
Yeah,
I'm making sense with that.
Totally. And I just thought, what Matthias has said, that there is this target, the telos, and maybe that's the way. And Nicholas has just said that there were appointed individuals, and maybe we can also define some kind of processes, how we could get regulations ready, but on an international level. So do you have suggestions, that some takeaways from your experiences?
I think I would be actually wanting to direct that to Matthias and ask, how was the UNESCO process? And is that something that could be learned from? And then did the UNESCO process also involve industry and corporations? Because I think that we saw that the WEF process is very exclusive to the members of the WEF, but the UNESCO process, is it exclusive then to the diplomatic sphere, or can we, out of both of those learnings, would we have to make a suggestion for a process that is more inclusive?
So through the multi-year process, they organize a number of get-togethers with industry and civil society. Now, admittedly, UNESCO has a certain, let's say, a certain preference for engaging with civil society over tech companies. But I would argue that if you take together WEF and UNESCO, you come up with a pretty decent a picture of what different stakeholders care about, right? Then you put into the mix some scientists, and you put basically everyone, right? So no process is perfect, but in terms of diplomatic representation, that one is pretty decent. But again, it's not the best way to go about such a creating such a nuanced document like the one which you're having, right?
Yeah.
There's a question on the net. How often ethical principles on tech accepted by many countries in the past were violated and required update and revision? Could quantum wave in tech be seen as an occasion to revise and evaluate and update the recommendations or the regulations? Matthias, do you?
Well, I mean, ethical principles violated. That's a bit difficult to answer.
Maybe I better speak, because writing sometimes is not the easiest.
Yeah,
it's
that's
not the
probably
easiest way. How it got dark here in the meantime. So my question is, first of all, just the informative one. So there are regulations in different ways. This is I learned from you, Matthias, that there can be recommendations or some more soft or more hard, depending on the moment. And you also mentioned that there are some conventions that are accepted by many countries, and we should not underestimate the value of those agreements, let's say, between many countries on certain values and regulations about technology. But did I get you right on that point?
Well, what I said was the UNESCO recommendation was agreed upon by 192 member states.
Yeah.
Which still doesn't make it binding. It just increases its normative pull. It increases the intrinsic motivation by states to keep with the standard because they've committed to it. They are seen to have committed to it. There is no court in the world where you could use them and try a country. There are, of course, certain conventions, international treaties that states have signed that have implications for their international legal duties and that engage them with regard to technology. Just think about the Convention 108 within the Council of Europe on data protection and privacy rights, or the many conventions on ending exploitation of children, child rights conventions. Those also have applications for how to navigate the tech world online. But there is no specific convention yet on ethics of AI, for instance, because ethics don't lend themselves to being implemented and checked in a way that is internationally legally binding. That's only a place where you get to once views of a regulatory field have hardened or have crystallized to the point that states actually are ready to submit to certain common rules, and that takes time. The Law of the Sea Convention took about 30 years, based on 30 years of practice of international custom to evolve. We still don't have any international convention on internet architecture. We don't have any international convention on protecting the common core of the internet, for instance. So I wouldn't hold my breath that we're going to get anything regarding AI ethics at this point, and quantum technology is still very much out there. So I think we're here still in the soft field of regulation, which gives us so much leeway for good ideas.
So what would be your first recommendation?
My first recommendation
for a soft regulation? What's like the most at the heart of soft governance for quantum technology? What would you say is like a
leverage the good things we can take from Mira's recommendations, especially this international dimension, the openness of development. Combine that with the intergenerational, intersectional, international justice orientation, and that takes us a long way already. And tie that to the UN processes of the Global Digital Compact with a view to informing the declaration on the future conference of 2024.
Wow. Do you have anything to add, Mira? No.
I think that would be pretty good.
So
Maybe I would add a reflective process in between. so that we, you know, take time to reflect on this WEF government. I'm by now critical of it. Take time to reflect on maybe the UNESCO to see whether that's a good, you know, what can be taken out of that. So yeah, in that process, bringing steps of reflection. But other than that, I think Matthias, we can go that route.
Is there any comment from the audience? No.
I do have a question about. I do have a comment. I do have a general question more on export controls and what your views are regarding that, and just general scientific interactions. Because of course we have talked about the merits of having, let's say, a more open space for innovation internationally, and let's say the utilitarian side of it. Open innovation breeds better innovation usually. But what about? I mean, I would ask the panelists to think about the securitized argument. To what extent do you think that has any merit? And yes, that's the question.
So you mean export controls for ideas?
Export controls for ideas, for software, for people.
But sometimes makes sense. I mean, so it's a big topic that's a lot of research institutes are currently confronted with. For instance, should we be more careful? Should European institutions be more careful in admitting Chinese PhD students, for instance? That's a loaded question that has a big ethical backpack with it. I think that we need to be very careful in not to show ourselves to be prejudiced against anybody. That being said, it is a perfectly valid political priority that a state or region can set to say that they want to make sure that advances in technology first profit them and their region. That's a valid point to make, not one which I would subscribe to, because I think I've made that point a couple of times now. I am a firm believer in the intergenerational and international solidarity dimension of scientific advancement. So I would try to reduce the issue of export controls to the core problem behind it, namely the fear that technology that a region develops is then used against that region or against the values that region holds dear. We can perhaps counter that or alleviate that fear by, again, cooperating internationally so that no region feels they need to steal or surreptitiously gain access to technology. Shouldn't technology be as open as possible? And that, just as an aside, there are some dual use dimensions which obviously are problematic. For instance, if you develop, if some company develops a computing solution which can quickly declassify information and then sells that to the secret service of an authoritarian state, that would be one example where I would perfectly feel fine with agreeing to export controls. But those would be very specific questions, and they pose themselves right now too with regard to surveillance technology.
So is there also a time for this kind of regulations? Is there a good time and a bad time for this regarding the development of technology? Like in early stages, you're kind of like bound to the idea that there's international cooperation. You cannot develop something on your own. Mm-hmm. You need a lot of brilliant heads, and you cannot look at the passport first. You got to look at the brain.
Well, I mean, I guess it's like Latin translation, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So I would err on the side of openness.
Mira, do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, I would want to ask what we think as the group here. Who should make those decisions? So with export controls, of course, that's in the nation states who decide which nations a company that has their headquarters there can export to and can work to. And do we think that's right, or should there be a more, like, if we want to encourage more openness, should there also be more kind of international suggestions on export controls? That's one, because, so for instance, my personal view, I think it's fine that IBM doesn't take the decision on who they want to not work with or work with, and that they have to obey the national regulation. I mean, of course, that's in terms, if you looked at, you could also say, well, we're losing a market there. But I think it's right that private corporations are not taking those decisions. But I guess the question is, should the decisions, is it fine for the decisions being at the level of nation states, or should it be international? That's one question. I'd be curious to hear what others are thinking. And the second point was on the openness requiring equal openness, and I think that is something that is very much feared, especially with regards to China. When you speak about quantum sensing, quantum communications, there's this rumors, or some people, sometimes I see slides, sometimes about the quantum internet that China has built. And of course, if we did that, I think it's fair to ask that those who participate in sharing of knowledge, that it's an equal participation. And I wonder which body or what form of governance we can find globally to then make sure it is equal participation in collaboration, and that it isn't oversharing, by certain, say, more democracies at the expense kind of, or at the benefit of less democratic systems.
Yeah, so I think that is a very important question that you raised, but maybe that this is also the point of only looking at quantum technology that is very high tech. But for instance, if you look at quantum sensors, it's less sensitive. You can probably widely share and also get market access. Siki shakes his head. No.
Yeah. Quantum sensors have export controls longer than quantum computing. There have been, at least for the last couple of years, because they are considered as military grade sensors, so they are subjected to already existing export controls. So you don't need to go and additionally say that you cannot export these kind of sensors, because they are already subjected to the existing export controls.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my idea wasn't right. Matthias, what do you think?
I'm just reading your sign there, which says my other computer is in superposition. And I love bad language jokes, So in a certain way, aren't we all in a superposition to provide guidance regarding better rules?
Yeah.
I know. It's getting late. But that's fun, right?
Nicolas.
I have a question again on perhaps a little bit of a different direction. In the sense of, okay, we are in perhaps a moment which is more conducive to, let's say, softer norms, which can leave some ways for the technology to develop in different ways and so on. But to what extent, taking a more STS approach, are we already getting pretty hard norms developed in the way in which we're pursuing these technologies? So the engineering of this technologies are, I'm trying to say that the engineering of these technologies are already forming the hard norms, which will, to an extent, dictate how we move forward. So in terms of deciding architectures and so on, are you aware of any particular specific debates within the, let's say, different architectures for quantum computers or for quantum sensors that are happening right now that might be problematic or might be interesting to look at in general?
Perhaps Mira, you want to? I have some comments, but if you.
The debates I'm hearing and attuned to are more debates on which architectures, which technologies will bring us to quantum advantage, and it's more the I guess scientific or technological decision on what do we don't have to do to get used for quantum computers. So
I mean, the people from Parity QC, one of the two startups we're involved with, they tell me that there's currently a standardization process from within a number of quantum architecture companies that's being started, that the head of the owner of Quantum QC is co-heading. So I've been asked to get involved there a little bit, and I'll be able to tell you a bit more once I've been to their first meeting. But this is a really bottom up and not at all hard law-oriented approach, which really is a classical standardization thing, like the requests for commons approach in the 70s and 80s regarding the internet, right? So I think we're really still in the softest of soft norms, norm phase, you know, think chocolate on a hot day in your child's hand.
Nice.
Maybe we can.
Somebody raised its hand.
Yeah, JC's question, and then we can conclude, because I think it has been going on for quite a while.
Yeah. John.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on a few things on international collaboration and the problems associated with military approach to it. Most probably in the room won't know I spent 30 years in the military and then 10 years in Delft. So I've seen it from both sides. The problem about trying, as Mira was trying to say, that, you know, could we have an international forum to decide on what the export regulation should be? That has happened. Of course, there are many occasions where international human rights or nuclear disarmament, or, you know, they've been raised above the national level. But ultimately, wherever that multi-country business lies, where the headquarter is, so I can't speak for Dell, I'm not in Dell anymore, you know, but those very large companies have to abide by the rules in which their headquarters or in which they're registered. And those regulations are set by the nation, because they're ultimately responsible for the laws associated with that. And that can get difficult. And that's not only the difficulty in the regulation between nation to nation, but then there's also, when you're dealing with worldwide companies, the competitive nature between Dell and HP and IBM, etc., and what they're willing to share. And as Mira said earlier, you know, some are putting their quantum computing on clouds and others not. None of this should go against us trying to work for international collaboration and driving forward and driving standards and seeing what we can do. Just being aware in the back of our mind that there may be some times where you can only go so far. And the, may I say, rather simplistic attitude about, well, can we just rely on keeping advanced quantum technologies to national and allowing the sharing of others? We've seen in other areas where simple things have sometimes been used in different ways. You can see the way that, for instance, even in drones, you know, playthings that were of a few years ago are now being used on the battlefield to great effect. So using things which fundamentally to begin with didn't seem to have a military application, but subsequently do, in the way that in which they're being used, can sometimes bring them back into a national protective sphere. They're just some comments.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, JC. And we really want to thank you, Mira and Matthias, and, you know, Pieter already left. So let's just get and find the next one. And this has been a very long and very productive panel, I would suppose. And thank you, Astrid, for your wonderful moderation. And another